Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It's at the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? We're gonna have to find out.
Krez fluttered his eyes open as he heard the buzzer humming through the barracks. Slowly, he rose up out of his sleeping pond as the others around him did the same. The Crusticans dripped off for a moment and turned, walking forward through the barracks. Soon they were out in the cafeteria, each getting into line with a tray. Many of them were twitching their mandibles as they tried to wake up. It never seemed like they got enough sleep anymore. It had been rather busy since the war had begun. For some reason, the normal Greslin security wasn't considered enough for the capital, so several units of veteran hunter-killers had been brought in to act as both ceremonial and actual guards. This was fine in theory, but many of the new members didn't like being guards. Normally, the guard positions were bred specifically for the task from the Grand Matriarch's stock, but the influx meant there would be some lag time before her newly laid eggs hatched, and longer still before they were full-sized and ready to work. So a number of career killers were stuck working security, guarding the cowards who made up the officials of the other species. No one had attacked the capital since the Regulation War, and assassinations were very uncommon. But they were scared, and he was a soldier, so here he was. He clicked out in annoyance, as he had every day since getting this post, when they filled his tray with food. Grains, fish, some grayish-brown substance they liberally called sauce. They were still changing over the cafeteria from Greslin specs, so the Crustican replacements had to make do with field rations for now. So he moved over to a table, setting the tray down as he settled in a sitting position with his legs partially tucked under his body, picking up the pieces he ate with the same quick motions he had back in training as a juvenile. When he was finished, he and the rest of his table rose as one, moving to deposit their trays for cleaning. Then they moved out into the hygiene room. Krez was next to Vec this morning, so they took turns inspecting each other's back shell for any defects or discoloration in the hydrating mucus. Once done, they turned towards a mirror, each picking up a brush and pick to clean their mouths of food they hadn't consumed. Once they were finished with that, they moved out to their prep room. They opened their lockers as each pulled on a combat harness. They were supposed to have those fancy ones like the rest of the ceremonial guard, but instead, they just had standard black mesh. Shield emitter, stunner, short-range hand beamer, some energy packs, a set of energy restraints, and of course, their targeting computers. They checked each piece as they tucked it into their black mesh harnesses, and then, when they were finished, they closed their lockers and walked through the blank, beige halls that made up the service corridors of the capital. Soon, they reached a junction, various teams splitting up to go to their assigned sectors. Krez and 5 others moved along their path, soon ascending a set of stairs to reach the small security office overseeing one of the building entrances. The dignitaries had all gone through on this shift, so this was the actual ceremonial guard. Their shiny silver-white harnesses, top-of-the-line equipment, perfectly conditioned shells. Krez hated them. They always acted so superior, and he knew many of them boasted about getting to court one of the younger matriarchs for the possibility of breeding rights. So unfair. Krez knew that unless all other viable males suddenly died, he'd never be allowed to breed.
We did all the hard stuff for you already. Just try not to burn the building down while we're gone.
One of the other guards said, as the others chittered in amusement. Krez and his brothers clicked in annoyance, but quickly replaced the guards. Krez checked the weapons locker and noted all the heavier energy weapons were still in place. He stepped out of the office into the main station, near the weapons scanner. The other 5 stayed in the office, but he liked being out in the corridor better. They'd left one of the vid screens open to the summit, going on not far from his position. He watched as one of the Greslin superintendents stood before the assembled officials.
Which is why we need a unified effort against these humans. They openly defy all conventional methods of warfare, If we don't present them a single force, they'll take us apart piece by piece. The Kitians are already showing their cowardly nature by surrendering several systems without a fight.
The Kitian ambassador gulped and stood up.
The greatest fleet you've ever assembled was destroyed in a single action against them. What hope do we have?
Then he sat back down. There was a murmur spreading throughout the officials. Of course, the Greslin's stance didn't change since he was in an exosuit, but Kress figured he wasn't too happy about that comment.
It was a cowardly surprise attack, nothing more. They refuse to face us in a true battle because they know our dreadnoughts will annihilate their so-called supercarriers. But we have numbers on our sides. They can't be everywhere at once.
But they have nuclear weapons.
Another worried diplomat gasped out. There was a rumble from Matriarch Nicole, who was taking the place of the Grand Matriarch tonight. Apparently, the Grand Matriarch was ill, which was unusual.
Might I remind you all that we have faced this threat firsthand, and this is why we know we must defeat them now.
The vid screen switched over to images of the destroyed colony. Kress chittered nervously as he looked at them. It was unnerving to see the shadows that were etched into the stone. The twisted and melted structures. He knew they were choosing the absolute worst pictures to highlight how terrible it was. But he was confident that there wasn't any good pictures from a city that had been hit by nuclear weapons.
These Americans have not only used these weapons against us, but they've used them against the race from which they descend. The UHG has confirmed that Americans have used these weapons before. This subspecies is incredibly dangerous. They must be dealt with now.
There were rumors that even the founders couldn't push the other species to agree to war against all of humanity, so they had to settle for the American subspecies. Still, everything he'd seen made it seem like the UHG would be far more reasonable.
Not only must we deal with the Americans, but the Libertonians who clearly provoked this war and likely influenced the Americans secretly beforehand. When this war is over, they shall not be allowed any autonomy.
That drew more murmurs and surprise from the diplomats around the chamber. There was a click on his comm.
Loading Bay 22 here. The Gerweldians have brought a statue. We're checking it in.
Careful, Loading Bay 22. They might have hidden snacks inside.
He heard someone reply, and there were clicks of mirth across the comm. Kress looked back at the screen. He wished he was out fighting the humans. He knew they had destroyed their colony in response to the raids. But he would be glad to serve his species gloriously in battle. He heard it was bad on Bastion. He should be out there with his brothers, not stuck here being bored and eating bad rations. Maybe he could get a forward posting by the end of the war, see if he could earn some glory accolades. It was a long shot, but maybe he could get courtship rights with a new breed matriarch. With any luck, his people would come out of this war stronger than ever. They'd used the first war with the Libertonians to advance their power considerably. This shouldn't be any different. He'd been watching the screen, but not paying attention, so he had to concentrate to figure out what was going on now. One of those strange reptiles who licked their own eyeballs was talking. What was their name again? Busmites or something like that?
But the founders have not allowed any new member species even half of their own power. Clearly, this war is an indicator that the founders must distribute power more evenly.
Kress chittered a little as he heard the murmurs in the crowd. He was never fond of diplomats, but it irked him to see the other species use this war as a platform to gain power. It didn't occur to him that he was hoping his own species could do just that.
The war must first be won, which is why we're undergoing massive restructuring to better assist the combat that rages today,
said one of the Felas. They'd been fairly useless in this war. Their style of combat horribly easy for the Americans to defeat. So he knew they were looking for any way to start getting their honor back.
Hey, one of the security observers outside just went offline.
He heard one of his brothers say from the security room.
Just turn off the feed and turn it back on.
He called out. What did they expect? An attack on the Capitol building? Outrageous. It would take a massive fleet just to get this close. He looked back at the screen.
Furthermore, even if we do develop FTL technology to allow us to get into American-controlled space, How do you propose we attack their colonies? Have you seen the planets they inhabit? None of our species could survive on any one of those for more than a few minutes. And that's if they had appropriate survival gear.
Of course, Akitian was trying to defend their constant surrendering. The cowards just didn't want to fight. There was a chime, and he turned to see a Gerweldian with a large, Vikish bodyguard that had some sort of bag. He waved them through the scanner with a claw and looked back at the vid screen. The matriarch was talking.
Let us not forget.
He heard the approval chime of the machine as the Gerweldian passed through.
There are humans that have shown their evil and terrible nature on a small scale. The terrorists who attacked the museum are still out there.
He heard the negative buzzer as the Vikish tried to step through the device. He chittered in annoyance, figuring the idiot hadn't keyed his credentials in properly. Turning, he saw a massive blue fist racing towards his face. There was a solid crunch as his head snapped back, pieces of shell flying away as the matriarch spoke.
Even now the terrorist is out there. We must not forget the threat to our way of life that is...
Billy Bob, space trucker. Billy Bob leaped over the counter, walking towards the security door. He kicked it off the hinges with the amplified strength the fake bork suit gave him. The bag was on the counter, open, and in his hands was item number 1, an AA-6 shotgun. The stunned crabs inside were all staring at him, their mandibles twitching in shock.
Oh shit!
One had time to say before he finally pulled the trigger. The specially crafted 6-gauge rounds had been designed with the increased strength of a power suit in mind. And oh, did it show. Billy Bob stood in the doorway as he slowly turned. The buckshot flying out into the room, shredding crab and console alike. The guards flying backwards as they were torn apart by the torrent of fire and metal that was spewing out of the muzzle of that weapon. Billy Bob was very well aware he didn't need to go so far with it, but he stood there, feeling the weapon lightly jerk in his hands as it went through round after a round, pulverizing the room and everything inside it. Finally, the drum was empty, and he stood there, grinning inside the suit as the bork face mimicked the motion. He could see sunlight sneaking through the holes in the walls of the office, even though they were inside the Capitol building itself. Finally, he detached the drum, letting it fall to the floor and the pile of spent cartridges turning as he slapped another one into place. Then he hopped back over the counter, zipped up the bag, and slung it over his shoulder before grinning down at the hamster.
You're free to run away now. I think I blew our cover.
The hamster nodded and went running back out the way they'd come. He was humming inside his suit as he looked at the map overlay.
Any alarms?
No. You killed them all before they could react.
He heard Amelia's voice in his ear as he smiled.
The other teams are moving on their objectives. You need to clear one more security station and then the loading bay I'm in.
Understood.
He wished he could start playing some heavy metal right now. Oh, or Stars and Stripes Forever. I'll be the Beach Boys just to throw everyone for a loop. Oh well, he'd have to settle for his own sounds.
Oh! Yankee Doodle went to town! A ridding on a pony! Stuck a feather in his cap and called it Macaroni!
He was walking down a hallway as he saw a carb lean out to find out what the noise was. Seeing the armed bork, it let out a hiss of surprise before Billy Bob fired the shotgun, pulverizing the guard. Their shields utterly useless against the 6-gauge buckshot. As he stood in front of the next security booth, he didn't even bother hopping over the counter.
Yankee Doodle, keep it up!
He pulled the trigger again as the crabs started to rush out, only to get cut down, the lightweight Xeno construction splintering apart again as the rounds slammed into it.
Yankee Doodle Dandy!
He could see one inside frantically trying to open a weapons locker.
Mind the music in the step!
But there was nothing it could do as the buckshot tore through both the crab and the locker he was trying to open.
And with the girls be handy!
He stood there observing the second obliterated guard post before dropping the second drum and taking one off his harness before slamming it home. He began to hum then, trying to make it sound like cool theme music, or as close as one could get with humming theme music as he walked down the hall a ways. He saw the door for the loading bay and turned, kicking it in as the door went flying, smashing into a crab who'd been standing on the other side. He stepped out and saw these crabs had weapons in hand already, but they sure as hell hadn't been expecting him.
Hey guys, what's up?
They stared at him for a second, and then all began to aim as he pulled the trigger. The metal crate in the center held Amelia, but he knew she couldn't get out until he entered the code. Yet he didn't feel much like sharing these guys. He walked forward, the few rounds the crabs managed to fire getting absorbed by his suit's shield, which as far as he could tell was all the best of Xeno shielding and all the best of human high-density metal, which was fine by him. Soon they were splattered across the walls as he dropped the shotgun and opened a hatch on the side of the crate.
Have you out in a jiffy, Amelia?
Good. The others are reporting total success so far.
Then he heard the door to the loading bay open and looked over to see several surprise crabs and one of those armored metal ones. Fuck! He quickly pulled the bag open again and then leaped forward as he pulled out his next weapon.
What's happening, Billy Bob?
I got it!
He reassured Amelia as he rushed forward, holding in his hands what amounted to an all-metal power suit, ready fire axe. The head had been sharpened to as fine a point as possible with modern technology, and he wasn't sure if that meant a single atom or molecule or whatever, but he knew it was fucking sharp. The crab in his sights had time to widen his eyes in surprise, but that was about it, as Billy Bob slashed, cleaving through the guard without even a moment of resistance. Then he spun, extending his arms as he slashed through two more around him, who cried and gurgled as their upped bodies had been suddenly opened to the outside world. The armored crab tried to turn, but he jumped over it, slamming down on a screaming crab who fired a single shot up at him before Billy Bob collided with his body, crushing it beneath the heavy suit, even as he rolled forward and swung the axe once more to split it straight through the last regular crab's skull and torso. They were too big for it to be any kind of clean cut, but the body collapsed, leaking everywhere, while Billy Bob spun again. The armored crab was turning, but he swiped out, leaving the bottom half of its left legs off, and as it toppled over her, brought the axe down through the head to finish it off. He stood there for a few seconds, looking around as he heard Emily.
Wow, that was incredible. And here I doubted your melee weapon.
Axes are sweet!
Was his only reply as he turned to finish opening the crate the Libertonian power suit was in. Emily was watching from a building bordering the Capitol building grounds, and as Amelia finally had the freedom to sit up in her suit and step out into the daylight, she jumped up, flapping her wings as she quickly flew down to them.
All right, what's the plan now?
Billy Bob said, looking between the 10-foot-tall Libertonian power suit and Emily.
Seriously?
Amelia asked.
Yeah, I kind of forgot with all the awesomeness I've just done. We're killing stuff towards the center now, right?
Emily nodded.
The teams have activated some of the meeting room security features. We've just alerted the guards, but inside they're now sealed in, and their lines to the outside world are cut, so they have no idea we're coming.
Perfect, Billy Bob said, returning to his bag. He sheathed the axe on his back and pulled out the second-to-last weapon they'd given him. The other two stared at the strange-looking item he pulled out, made of composite materials.
What's that?
He activated it, and the item opened up, revealing an interior handle which he picked up, letting the rest of it nestle around his arm.
The ZF-1. It's light. Handle's adjustable for easy carrying. Good for rights and lefties. Breaks down to 4 parts undetectable by X-ray. Ideal for quick, discrete interventions. A word on firepower. Titanium recharger. 3,000 clips with bursts of 3 to 300. Plus all the oldies but goldies, rocket launcher, arrow launcher, and flamethrower. My favorite.
They stared at him for a moment while he dropped the AA-6 back into the bag and slung it over his shoulder, shifted the axe from his back to a side sheath on his harness. It took a very specific sheath to house that blade, and he didn't want to accidentally cut parts of himself off while he fought.
All right, ladies, move out.
Well, I'm not. You're fighting forward. I'm holding them off from out here.
Amelia said, turning as the power suit stepped outside and he blinked.
Then why did we smuggle you in here?
To get me as close as possible while the others secured the security systems.
He thought that over, trying to decide if it was a good plan or not, before shrugging and walking into the Capitol building with Emily behind him.
Stay behind cover until I let you know we're clear.
She nodded and kept a ways back from him as he kicked down another door and found himself in a wide corridor. There were statues and paintings and tapestries of various xenos from the founding species, and he was sure that they wanted him to feel awe and respect for all the history around him. Instead, he turned to one of the paintings of a giant crab queen bitch and activated the flamethrower. A jet of fire burst out, torching it as an alarm rang out. He saw crabs with silver shields and much better-looking weapons burst out from around a junction to his left and smiled.
Something tells me we go this way.
He began to let out bursts of those titanium bullets which tore through the crabs. Shots slamming into his shield as he advanced, seemingly unconcerned.
Ooh, I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day!
A rocket zipped out to obliterate a crab on a balcony with a matter slammer.
Yee, been working on the railroad just to pass the time away.
He saw another group burst out of a door to his right and turned, letting out a non-stop burst of fire as the bullets cut through the three of them.
Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morn.
Another matter, slammer on the balcony down the hall, but 3 arrows slammed into that one's chest as it screeched and tumbled over the railing.
Can't you hear the captain shooting?
There was some sort of emplacement around the next corridor junction, but a jet of fire was quick to get the crabs burning, and a burst of bullets cut them down.
Dina, blow your horn!
He looked back at Emily and then down each of the corridors he could see before waving her forward.
Hope you don't mind, but I'm gonna skip ahead.
Skip ahead? To where?
No, in the song.
He could see movement ahead with some sort of massive ornate metal door behind a series of emplacements, but he just marched forward.
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah! Someone's in the kitchen, I know!
A rocket streamed out from his gun, exploding one of the fixed guns he could see on a platform to the left side of the massive door.
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah! Someone's in the kitchen, I know, whoa!
He aimed to fire another rocket at the other side and heard a beep. Quickly, he triggered another blast of arrows, which peppered that platform, hissing out green smoke as the crabs coughed and sputtered, clutching their faces as they either died or passed out. He had no idea.
Strumming on the old banjo, singing fee-fi, fiddly-I-O.
More crabs were behind some heavier shielding, but he let out a steady burst of bullets, which made the shields flicker and fail before the crabs behind them were turned into shreds.
Fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O.
He saw another crab who frantically activated some sort of shielding in an alcove to the side.
This barrier is immune to ballistics.
It quickly shouted at him, raising a matter slammer while he just thumbed the flamethrower once more. And as the crabs screamed out, engulfed in flames, Billy Bob sang,
Strumming on the old banjo.
The crab slumped down dead, the shield still in place as he smiled back at Emily.
I fucking love my job.
And so splits another chapter of Billy Bob's Space Trucker.